So, perfect. Today, I'm going to explain to you guys my conjecture that I have worked on for the last number of years. The conjecture is that the theory of everything, which we are searching for in physics, is embodied by femes. These are fundamental replicators. So, I was just saying that I came up with this idea a number of years ago. It's a nice place to start because it identifies that the intuition about evolution. So currently we have the fine-tuning problem in physics. The fine-tuning problem is the question of why the universe has the form that it does. If any of the constants and parameters that are specified in the standard model or any model of physics were changed or varied, the vast majority of transformations to the form of the laws of physics would destroy the capacity of our universe to support life. That is described as the fine-tuning problem. Why do the laws of physics have this form? It's a dilemma. But we do not ask why our body has this form, even though on the genetic code there are 2 billion bases. So therefore, 2 to the power of that number of possible forms of the DNA molecules in our body. That is clearly fine-tuned, but the explanation for why the gene has the form that it does is evolution. That has been selected by evolution. That's why it exists now. I had the intuition a number of years ago that the same could resolve the fine-tuning problem. But that idea in itself is not that valuable. You need to refine how that would have happened, in what space that would have happened, etc. So I set about doing that, and I've come up with a kind of solution conjecture. If this is true, if the laws of physics were selected by evolution, what would that mean in terms of falsifiable predictions from that idea, from that theory? Karl Popper famously stated in the 1970s that evolution is a tautology and that it proves itself. It doesn't really classify as a traditional theory. It is true because evolution is numerically reducible. It's hard to make predictions. For example, when Darwin published The Origin of Species, that book contains no predictions about evolution. It's kind of hard to make predictions, especially with this idea, but I think that I've managed to make some basic ones that are falsifiable. I'll explain those at the end. Firstly, I will explain kind of the overarching perspective that we gain from this idea. So so essentially, at the end of this talk, by the way, feel free to interject anybody. It's really helpful for any person to ask questions because it's quite a cliche, but it's quite someone else always has the same question. When people ask questions, it helps me explain better because I know you guys are following along, etc. So just feel free to interrupt and ask questions at any time. I would appreciate it. So this talk, what I want to explain to you guys is this sentence. The theory of everything is embodied by replicators called femes. That's the idea. When I had this intuition, the two contemporary works that guided me through its development were through the development of the theory were constructor theory and the Wolfram Physics Project, and basically just the principles from both of these. The principle from this so constructor theory is a theory by David Deutsch, not Wolfram, so by David Deutsch, and what it states is that knowledge propagates through time. That's what every information system obeys, the propagation of knowledge. Knowledge is anything that tends to remain once it is instantiated. Examples being the genetic code of a butterfly, particular memes, if everyone knows what memes are. For example, the thumbs up. And another form of knowledge is the team, as coined by Susan Blackmore. It's a technological aim. They are replicators instantiated in silicon processing systems. That's what teams are. So We then gain the perspective that this is the form of reality. 4 billion years ago, genes existed. Genes guided the dynamic evolution of the world. Genes are the reason that bodies exist, that trees exist. Memes then are replicators instantiated in neural processing. They resulted in the Statue of Liberty, traffic lights. Teams resulted in the form of this mouse, this Zoom call. They're the replicators in information systems that propagate through copying, pasting, sending of code, transmission of code. We then realized that the whole of our reality around us is guided by the evolution of replicators. This was quite a paradigm shift in the 70s when Dawkins released his paper or released the book, The Selfish Gene. We gained an understanding of how deeply our reality is guided and formed by the evolution of replicators. Then we realized, oh, it's replicators also form in our brain. They are the reason that we have the society that has the form that it does. Then we say teams exist. My work is the first time the following idea has presented that these are not the only three abstract replicators that have guided the form of our universe. Femes are fundamental replicators in reality that interact with the reality around them in order to result in its form. So this is why, so constructor theory, the reason that constructor theory is relevant is because constructor theory by David Deutsch, the father of quantum computing, what constructor theory says is that when information systems evolve through time, knowledge propagates. Knowledge is anything that tends to remain once it is instantiated. Another example that's probably more familiar to a lot of people is the game of life, the glider. If anyone knows what this is, when you instantiate a glider on the game of life, once you instantiate that form, it tends to remain whenever you update it with the game of life rules. So the glider is knowledge because knowledge is anything that tends to remain instantiated in an environment once it is instantiated. And this is basically what Deutsch talks about in constructor theory. Constructor theory, as Deutsch says himself, is a meta theory of physics because it deals with more than just physics. It deals with the generalized dynamics of information, how information behaves. And what it says is that constructors form, a glider is a constructor is something that embodies knowledge. Then eventually so another constructor is an enzyme or catalyst, example being platinum in this interaction. It embodies knowledge because it interacts and has the same form after interaction. It's knowledge because it tends to remain. Similarly, the game of life is knowledge. The rows are not because it tends to remain in this environment, but it remains in the computer memory because it's useful for humans. Conway invented the game of life and it is propagated because it's effective for visualizing information dynamics. Therefore, it constitutes knowledge. Then Deutsch goes into the details of constructors. We're not going to do that today. The paper is 20 pages long, and the first 17 or so pages of that are a deep dive into the way that we use terms here, like knowledge, information, interaction, replicator, constructor. But it's kind of written like a textbook so that we can understand just the conjecture in 2 pages. And the conjecture is that no matter what the form of the system is before the Big Bang, so right now the fine-tuning problem exists. The fine-tuning problem is why did the laws of physics have an incredibly arbitrary form at the beginning, at the Big Bang? Current physics can go 14 billion years ago and say the laws of physics existed in this form 14 billion years ago. We can't go any further. We have no explanation for why that happened. My point that I'm trying to present here is that we don't need anything other than the fact that when information exists and interacts, constructors form, then certain constructors can form replicators. Replicators are just an I haven't defined them, but replicators can cause copies of themselves. Ah, yeah. Replicators can cause copies of themselves. Examples being the structure in high life. Whenever it interacts with the fundamental update rows, it causes copies of itself. If you have a constructor that can cause a copy of itself as well as remain in the environment, you get evolution. Evolution is repeated cycles where information is replicated and selected, and the information is copied imperfectly, allowing for mutation. Once you have replication and evolution, once you have replication, you have evolution. So we don't know what happened before the universe, before the Big Bang. But if it was constituted by information and it was an information system, what is true about that system that existed before the Big Bang is that knowledge was selected. And knowledge, if it interacts enough, will start to propagate in replicators. So the idea here is that at the point of the Big Bang, there was a replicator that interacted to cause the laws of physics. That's a nice idea, but it seems very far from contemporary physics, and that's where the second idea that this is founded on comes in, which is the Wolfram Physics Project. So that's constructor theory. The reason constructor theory is relevant is because it deals with generalized dynamics of information systems. The logical conclusion of that is that before the Big Bang, the information system that existed before followed these dynamics also, where replicators evolved. Then, in order to tie this in with how this fundamental replicator would interact to cause the transformations of the laws of physics, we need to think about what that term actually means. So yeah, here's Stephen Wolfram talking about how reality is updated by some fundamental rule that we could write in Wolfram language, and then abstract analysis of that leads to quantum mechanics and general relativity. That's the conclusion that is taken in Wolfram Physics Project, and that's the one that is agreed with in this work and built upon. So
to see if within this decade we can finally sort of hold in our hands the rule for our universe. And
okay, so what that means is that this is the perspective taken. What Stephen Wolfram is saying there is that there is some fundamental update rule that interacts with reality, and then the reality can be analyzed at a numerically reducible level. It can be parsed into quantum mechanics and general relativity. So there's what then the Wolfram Physics Project, which is a project, has found over the last couple of years, is that there is a massive space of computational models that have this property, that they can be analyzed at abstract levels to give mathematics consistent with general relativity and quantum mechanics when they're updated by this fundamental update rule. But this is incomplete. Why would the fundamental update rule propagate through time? There's no mechanism for doing so. But when you look at the butterfly DNA, the reason that those transformations propagate, the reason that the structure propagates that can turn an egg into a caterpillar is because it has the form of a replicator. So it interacts with its environment, and its environment makes it propagate. Similarly, there's like a symmetry here between um yeah, there's quite a symmetry here. I could make the diagrams clear. I haven't, apologies, but this grid that has the glider on it is similar to our universe, and it is updated by a fundamental update rule. And there is an abstract analysis of this system, which is a numerically reducible abstract analysis that is like symmetrical or mirrors. This is quantum mechanics, and this is the fundamental update rule. But as we see, As we see here, the fundamental update rule, if isolated, it doesn't propagate. It needs the computer memory to be the substrate that the fundamental update rule is stored on. And it is a replicator only whenever you consider the computer memory. So the fundamental update rule that updates the game of life grid is actually a replicator whenever you consider the full environment. There's no mechanism for it to propagate without it being a replicator. Similarly, the point is that if you take Stephen Wolfram's perspective that is presented, he doesn't actually provide a mechanism for the fundamental update rule to propagate through time. Like, why would our universe retain the laws of physics? Where are they written? Are they written by like God in heaven and he comes down and applies them every time? How are they instantiated by information? That's where the simulation hypothesis comes in that Melvin talks about. My point is that it's not, you can reframe this so that you don't need the laws of physics to be written in some different godly place. They can be instantiated in some information the same way a replicator is. That's the second reason that you kind of can come at it from. So, how are the laws of physics propagated through time? That's a question that people can't answer. Where are Einstein's general relativity laws written? Who applies them? Who updates the information like that? Why is our information updated with that form? It's not really answered. But if you frame the laws of physics as transformations embodied by a replicator, then you have an answer for how they propagate through time. So yeah, this is the perspective we end up with. So if you would please fill out the Google form just to give me some feedback, because I could go into quite lengthy detail on like how we define information and that, but I feel like this is fine. That we just now move on to the predictions. Okay, so what are their predictions? If this idea was correct, what would the implications be? Every single one of these replicators, genes, memes, and teams, they all have error correcting codes. That's a property that is selected for. Every replicator has the property that they can, excuse me, error correct their form. So whenever teams were invented in 1937, Claude Shannon, the father of information theory, came along and said that you can actually transmit or copy messages with arbitrary accuracy because you can error correct. And evolutionary systems had already discovered that, and technological information is technically a subset of an evolutionary system. So you have error correcting codes like Hammond codes. Similarly, memetics, if I say he is a doctor who is respected for his work, there are two references to the gender there. So you can still propagate, you can still create the meme of a male doctor. If you hear my message incorrectly, the meme can still be transmitted to you because I refer to the gender twice. It's a form of error correction. Similarly, degeneracy in the genetic code. The point is that femes would similarly have error correcting mechanisms. And the reason I've used this symbol to represent femes is because it's actually the symbol for an adinkra, which Jim Gates in 2010 discovered that adinkras are a way to formulate physics in supersymmetry such that they require error correction in order to propagate through time. So he says himself, does this mean that there was some kind of form of evolution acting on the mathematical laws of physics of our universe? Because the only place we know about error correcting codes is genetics. It's in evolutionary systems. We also know about it in memetics and themetics. He claims that he found, and with many others, Jim Gates is an incredibly well-respected super symmetry guy, if you want to look him up. But he says that what he has found purely from the mathematics is that they have to be embodied. They have to embody error correcting codes to function properly. Hammond codes. And my point is that that is a necessary consequence of them being replicators, because every replicator, error correcting, is always selected for in evolutionary systems.
Thomas, can I ask a question very briefly here?
Uh,
Yeah, it's good, but isn't the whole point about evolution is that it transmits its errors, reproduces its errors, and that in order, selection has to be about a choice. It has to make choices between things that are presented to be selected. So these replicators cannot be perfect.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, it's quite a nuanced point. So it's necessary for there to be mutation in order for that new mutation to be selected for. But if you it's all because the idea that knowledge is hard to vary and hard to come by. So again, there are 2 billion base pairs of my genetic code. The vast majority of transformations to my genetic code would destroy my capacity of my genes to like sustain me as a human. So it's extremely advantageous if you have like peptides that can go along and correct errors. So you want to correct the vast majority of errors because the vast majority of errors will destroy the knowledge and the information, but you still will have errors. And those errors are the mutations that allow for selection. But the idea is just that you want error correcting capacities. And yeah, you want high fidelity replication and you need error correcting in order to do that. But
Yeah,
you also need errors in order to mutate. Yeah, I agree.
that's true. But still, there's the connection between the environment and the choice between items has to exist, has to be a fundamental component of the process. Would you not agree?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Could you repeat it,
Well,
please?
what I mean, the selection process has to be in place somehow from the very beginning, and it works together. I mean, if we're talking about genes, the alleles have to be present. The variations in alleles has to be present for the selection process to function. These
Yeah.
things work together as a system. So right at the very beginning of the very start of life,
Mhm.
there needs to be I'm not quite sure this structure between, let's say, the internal and the external working.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But it's just the point is that the error correcting is like a feature of anything that is selected in an evolutionary environment. And I agree because it's kind of confusing because you would always also need mutations in order for evolution. You need imperfect copying of information in order for there to be differentiation and therefore selection between differentiated parts and like sustainable evolution. But the point is that whenever you have that system, an extremely valuable mutation that will always be selected for is the ability to error correct on your form. So the ability to go through errors and then have some knowledge instantiated in your information structure that will allow you to go through an error and then return to your previous form. That's what like Hammond codes, etc., do that we're talking about here. What they do is they allow for like say a 16-bit message. You attach like 2 bits, I think, to a 16-bit message in order for if you flip any of the bits in that message, in order for that to be transmitted, like the what error needs to be corrected, where the bit flip happened on that 16-bit message. And that's what Hammond codes like exploit in order to work. So that capacity to return to your previous form is going to be selected by evolutionary systems because the majority of knowledge is hard to vary and hard to come by. It'll be destroyed if you put errors into it. Therefore, the capacity to error correct is selected for. I hope that answers the question
Yeah.
about the kind of difference.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Thanks.
No problem. Thanks for the question. So then the second prediction is a little less specific, but it just generally states that femes It's like what von Neumann said in the 30s before the discovery. I'm not sure if this is in the 30s, but before the discovery of DNA, von Neumann predicted that organisms must embody a program for their self-replication. They must embody a constructor that can cause an exact copy of themselves. This is basically recreating that prediction, but at the fundamental level, saying that femes must be able to interact with their environment in order to create another theme because they're replicators, just basic. Then this is actually an extremely interesting point, but it's not that well founded because we didn't go into detail on constructor theory. But one of the key principles from constructor theory is that all knowledge is parochial and fallible. In the question just asked, it was mentioned about environment. It's every piece of knowledge, everything that tends to remain, only has that property that it tends to remain in that specific environment. All knowledge is context dependent. There are an infinite subset of possible environments where any knowledge, any structure would fail to propagate on an infinite number of environments, and it would also succeed to propagate on an infinite number of environments, but they can't be bijected because they're both infinite sets. So every possible piece of information is fallible, and then that extends to, like, my genetic code wouldn't survive in a chicken egg, and similarly a chicken's genetic code wouldn't survive in a human embryo. Themes, if they are replicators, are similarly fallible. Therefore, the laws of physics are not immutable and like ethereal, as is currently considered to be true in contemporary physics. That's code that Stephen Wolfram just talked about. The arbitrary code that defines our laws can be changed. It is fallible information. Therefore, the consequence of the current laws of physics existing forever, heat death, is not guaranteed, which is good news. I'm happy about this. Also, themes are information efficient. If they contain error correcting codes, that suggests selection for an efficient form. And then that would just say that it's not really a prediction because prediction number 4 is actually a statement about other predictions. So it's not necessarily a prediction, but the statement about other predictions is that uh, predictions like the many words interpretation are actually less likely because they require such an immense volume of information. Themes and every information system selects for, and all evolution selects for information efficiency. So you couldn't, theories that require like an extraordinary amount of information compared to other theories are less likely to be correct purely by that heuristic. And then finally, the last prediction is that fine tuning results from selection of knowledge. So fine tuning is it's like the DNA in your body has been selected because it can do certain things. It can manipulate certain food and these certain proteins. It's been selected for the capacity to do that. Similarly, the prediction is that the capacity of our universe to support complex life and support complex evolution has been selected for. That's the knowledge that has caused the themes to be propagated because the capacity to support life is a subset. It's similar. It has the property of knowledge where it is hard to vary and hard to come by. The vast majority of transformations to the laws of physics would not create a universe that is conducive to life. Therefore, it has the property of knowledge where it is hard to vary and hard to come by. Yeah, further research. I want to write a paper further down the line, just kind of about entropy. If you think about it, it relates quite strongly because of the stuff about the heat death. But yeah, just Melvin's work on the second law of infodynamics and then a little on assembly theory. I feel like this kind of contemporary revolution that we're going through in terms of our understanding of complexity and information dynamics will reframe how we currently or how we understood the second law in the 1800s. We have like a genuinely new understanding of it, and this work will be relevant to that. And then a little bit about co-evolution of replicators and the implication of that for the hard problem of consciousness. But right now I'm quite happy with this paper. I'm happy that this is like a genuinely novel and potentially falsifiable conjecture about the formula laws of physics. Um, if anyone wants to give me any feedback, the forum is there. I really appreciate you guys taking time to listen to this. Cool.